Here we are, it's time for episode 3. This is where the fun begins. Everything is apart, everything is spotlessly clean, and everything is now ready to rebuild. So, an update on where we're up to. First of all, the frame's been stripped down, we've inspected it, and I've done a little bit of repair work. So, first of all, check that the bottom bracket is in absolutely fantastic condition. And this probably has to be one of the best Cannondale bottom brackets I've ever seen. There's also no evidence of light coming through there either. Both sides looking pretty good. And this surface is all beautifully clean. Probably, like I say, one of the best Cannondale bottom brackets I've seen. Done a little bit of work cleaning up the pivots here. I need to do a little bit more yet. So gone in there using some Scotch-Brite to try and get rid of all the surface corrosion. Some very light sanding, because you don't want to overlise these. It's just taking off the big parts. And then I've just gone in. I've done a fairly rough job with just some automotive touch-up paint, because this will be covered up. This is really to prevent any more corrosion coming through the paintwork. So this is where paintwork had been chipped off and scratched. So that's just a good layer of thick paint to do. I just need to tidy that up a little bit. So frame is ready to go. Loads and loads of parts have started arriving. We have our new 36 tooth chainring from Unite Components. These are beautifully well made. Jake used to ride for Unite Components before he hit the big time. So we know these have got a good heritage. We know these are pretty robust. We've done some other work here. So the stem bolts, well, this is what all the stem bolts look like. Absolutely rusted to hell. To be honest, we could tidy this up if we wanted to, but we have enough of these sort of things in stock. So we've just gone through and replaced all of those. Have our bottom bracket. So a little case in point, actually. Remember, this is not BB30, it's actually PF30. And also these cranks, even though they say SRAM, these aren't dub cranks, these are actually BB30 cranks, so 30mm cranks. So the bottom bracket we have is the plastic PF30, 30mm inside with the plastic top caps as well. So got that in. What else we got? Oh, Dan has done the shock rebuild, brand new componentry all through here. The rest of the inside was actually in good nick, but got some excellent footage of Dan doing the shock. Yeah, you can see that was actually inside. That is not cool at all. And these little adjuster knobs are all corroded away. All pretty grim. So we have new pivot bearings. These are going to go in here. So these are the Black Oxide coated max capacity bearings. Remember, max capacity means we put another ball in there, and these are really designed for pivots, just to do that going backwards and forward motion rather than a full rotation like your wheel bearings. We've also got a new lower headset bearing in the Black Oxide coated, because we know that this bike suffers from some corrosion. So this is going to go in here. And of course that's got a new crown race to be fitted as well. And a bit of info about the Lefty. We've put it back together, done a very simple service. Really all the corrosion around here and around here, it really does need to be sorted out. Now I complained about this in the last video quite a bit, like how we can't get hold of spares. And I asked for your help in the comments, and a few of you did. So unfortunately, the European distributors of this just don't like shipping to the UK because of Brexit. We could get them from the States, but the shipping and import taxes just make it unviable really. However, we did discover that there is one bike shop in the UK which is now the authorised service centre for Lefties. They are Tweed Valley Cycles up in Scotland. Now, as it turns out, an ex-employee of CSG Cannondale transferred up there and they've set this up for them. So you can still send these off. They've got the exclusive rights. They're not even allowed to sell us parts to do Lefty servicing ourselves. A service for them costs 200 quid for a full service, which if you're going to send it away and pay all the money for shipping or something that's as heavy as, well, it's 2 kilograms and long, it's about 35 quid to ship. You're going to want to do the full service. That doesn't include any parts, and really, I don't think that service centre would accept all of this corrosion because they're going to have to back it up with a warranty. So I think they'd want to replace the chassis. All this top cap assembly definitely needs replacing. There's so much corrosion in there. These barely turn. And also the top cap on the actual damper, I think, would need replacing. I think if it was me in the service centre, and I would probably also replace the bearing. So I think we're looking at a good 400 to 450 quid service cost on that. Now, here's the really annoying thing about it, because suspension is only as good if you've had it serviced regularly. So you might have the best, Cane Creek or Ollins fork, but if you can only afford to get it serviced once every couple of years, or it's a massive ball ache, then it's no better than a RockShox Recon at half the price that you can get serviced twice a year. Because a well-serviced, slick running, beautiful shock is always going to perform better than a really, really expensive fork that you can only get serviced once in a blue moon. So with that in mind, customer is really happy to go with these because, I mean, you can probably find a Fox service centre within probably a 20 to 30 mile radius of where you live. There's loads of them around here. We've got one in Kendal. The next nearest one to us is Cyclewise. There's one down in Ulverston. Most shops should be able to do a basic lower leg service, and that's what's really important to keep all that corrosion away. Here's the thing. You do think these Lefties are the absolute lightest weight, most beautiful things, but here we go. This is about a Lefty as light as it gets. So it hasn't even got the plastic tube here, and we are at 1.75 kilos there. Here is Fox 34, and remember, we haven't even cut the steerer, and it's still got its axle on, so like for like, this is 1.5. Fairly significant weight saving, I'd say, and you wouldn't think it to look at those two things in your hand, but you can definitely feel it. When it comes to the wheels, already rebuilt the front wheel, so this is now built onto a DT Swiss 350 with the 6 bolts on there, 110mm boost, built up super easy, using actually Sapin laser butted spokes, the same as the back wheel. Talking of which, there is the back wheel, and to be honest, this is probably the best part of the bike. The hub is actually in excellent condition, and the nipples aren't bad either as well. I'm going to do a little bit more tensioning work on this because there's a couple that are just coming a little bit loose. These bearings actually feel remarkable considering the state of the rest of the bike. Let's take a look and see what they're really like. So this is I think it's called a Hub Genie. Yeah, Hub Genie. Really cool little tool made by Junior. And it's for literally removing end caps. So you've got something to grip on with, because these can be an utter pig to remove. Pretty dry in there, but actually very good condition. I can't see any obvious signs of any sort of scarring on these at all. So DT Swiss, everything comes out on the non-drive side, and that feels almost like it's about to collapse, and there's loads of play in there. This bearing is actually spinning very nicely, but probably a little bit too nicely, to be fair, which probably means all the grease has disappeared from it and it is a little bit of play. Now, this is the bearing that always catches people out because it's the one behind the lock ring. So the best way of getting this out is forget about the DT Swiss tool, get yourself to one of these. This is from a company called Elevation Lab, and it means it's got a 24mm socket on here, but you can see how much this is beat up, and you'll see why. Because the best way of getting these out is to use one of these, This is a 1,000 Newton meter impact gun, and it's so much better than trying to put this into a vise and getting two of you cranking on it because you're putting all that force on your spokes and everything. So let me show you how quick and easy this is. It's better if you can to do this with a tyre on, so you can hold it in place with your knee. Make sure this bit is really well located and you're actually going in the loosened direction. The important thing is get your weight over it and straight out. And the nice thing is also pulls the seal out completely straight with it. Oh yeah, that bearing is toast. Easiest way of getting this out is use the axle the reverse way around. In fact, this isn't an original DT Swiss bearing, so this has been replaced before sometime, but there we go, you can see the play in there now. Now, these ratchet rings also can lose their edge. You can see they are looking nice and sharp. So what I'm looking for here is any rounding off of the edge. I'm looking for a good sharp angle on those teeth. And of course, sometimes you'll see like little bits of chipping or damage. So when you're cleaning these, it's important that you can clean this face, but you also need to get in there and clean all of these in between, because this has to slide in and out of the hub. So any sort of dirt and debris is just going to hinder that. Here is the spring. It looks like whoever assembled that put that spring the wrong way around. To be fair, the free hub actually feels really, really good. So I think we'll just service those bearings. But these two are going to get replaced. Going for this is what I call a 50% fill of the grease, and just work it in. Always worth checking these bits for damage, because if anything goes wrong, it's normally these bits that start to show the first signs of damage. So what I like to do is inspect and clean the parts as I go and lay them out on a clean piece of paper. So in here, what I'm looking for on the end caps, I want to make sure that little rubber O-ring is intact, because that's essentially what keeps everything together. Okay, with that all tidied up, let's replace some bearings. I've gone and selected an Enduro stainless steel bearing for the drive side. This is the one that suffers sort of the most corrosion. So I spent a little bit more money in getting that because it's harder to replace. On the non-drive side, we're just going to go for a standard ABEC 3 bearing. When you are doing this with DT Swiss bearings, just be aware that on some hubs, you do get a narrower bearing on that drive side. So just be aware, maybe just to compare the two, because sometimes you can get a 6.5mm bearing rather than a 7mm bearing, but this is good. Tiny little bit of grease just to aid construction. It's not absolutely covering it. This is just a construction aid, so we don't get any sort of gooling. So drive side in, axle goes in, line up the non-drive side. We're going to need an over axle kit, so the over axle kit needs to line up with the outside of the bearing like that. And then on this side we have over axle drift 6802 spacer, and because we've still got a little gap here, I need another little spacer. Again, make sure everything is nicely lined up. Remember, this is a construction grease. This is all about anti-corrosion, anti-galling. Remember, we're screwing a steel thing into an aluminium, so the opportunity for galled up threads is quite high. Now these have got a groove on the inside. That groove should line up with that washer, get everything straight. So before you really tighten this down, just make sure that this washer is absolutely central. It's going to sit in that groove. You need to move it around with the pick, you can, but now these are going to be self-tightening, so you don't even tighten up that loads and loads. The important thing is replace that seal. So every now and then this seal can be a bit awkward to get down, so what I've just set up here is just a little press just to make sure that seal goes down. If that seal isn't located, then your free hub will bind. So at this point, everything should be feeling very smooth, looking good, and also the axle shouldn't move. Shouldn't be any lateral play in there at all. So now we just need to reconstruct. So you need to use the DT Swiss special grease on this. And this grease, remember, you need to lube the sides. This is the bit that's going to slide up and down. And then depending on your appetite for noise, a little bit of grease. Nice. And a good little test to do is like give everything a good squish with your hand and make sure you can still move the free hub. So imagine if it's all clamped in a frame, that way you'll know straight away if you've got that bearing wrong or anything. If you've got some pressure on here and it all locks up, something's wrong, but that's all spinning nicely. Sorry for the wait, everybody. I had a little bit of a delay. These bits from Cannondale got lost in the post. Hair's got a little bit longer. Anyway, we have got a whole lot of building to do. We've got to get the rear triangle on and all sorts. So we have the actual schematic of the Cannondale Scalpel. And there's a few interesting points on here if you're a home builder. So you might notice that it tells you what type of greases to use. So here you see a 2. This actually refers to a Loctite. So we'll be using Loctite on those parts. And there'll be parts where it talks about a grease. And it says on here, NGLI2. Now NGLI2 actually refers to the consistency of the bearing grease. So luckily the grease that we use here, Mobile Grease XHP222, has NLGI of 2. Now it's actually got a chart to tell you what this is about. So if you're ever in doubt, there's a whole grease consistency chart. So NLGI2 means we've got the consistency of peanut butter. There we go, a little bit of knowledge for today. Hope that was useful. Right, let's get building. Now we've got these new pivot bolts here. You can see a little bit more clearly the design. This is called the Cannondale lockout system. So this is the pivot bolt here with the threads, and then you have this insert here which is tapered, so you can see these little cracks. So as you screw this in, these open up and expand, and then there's a bolt. So when you're undoing these, you will see this Torx head, and then this bit here looks like it's screwed in if you're not, don't just look at the schematic, but this should come out, see it gets stuck, and then you unscrew it from this direction. So it's counterintuitive, so a Cannondale bolt's worth getting the instructions out and knowing what it is you're actually unscrewing. Linkage is all in, quick sanity check, make sure that is all working smoothly. Remember, there's no pivots here on the Scalpel, so these are designed to flex. They actually flex here. It's quite hard to show on the camera, but as you flex it here, you can feel them moving. Next up, we need to fit this fork. So the customer has asked for 2 5mm spacers below and 1 5mm spacer above, which is all pretty standard. Got our new bearings and stuff on here, and we're going to need to cut this steerer and install a star nut as well. So for this, we're going to need a star nut setting tool. This is one by Junior, and we're going to use the Nipex pipe cutters as well. And we're going to use a sharp pick to mark where we're going to get this cut. Remember, a dry fit for now, so we're just going to work out where to cut it. Okay, and you set up our Nipex cutter. We want the blade just a couple of millimeters below that mark. Now, when you do this, always make sure hold your forks upside down, because you don't want any metal filings going down here into your stanchion, so keep everything upside down. We have a few little barbs, so there's a little tool on the back here. Go in and remove those. Now, I probably should have checked this before I put it onto the bike, but anyway, these really do need facing because it's just covered with, not paint, I think they plastic coat these. But anyway, if you are going to face these, remember it's not going to be flat, they're actually on an angle. So when you set your cutter up, just remember that. And all we're trying to do is just remove this little face of paint, just so that we're going to have a nice smooth interface. So what I'm looking for when I know it's done is if I can put pressure on just one side, shouldn't see a gap here. And if I imagine if I bolt that down, should not be a gap. So happy with that, much better. Okay, bottom bracket time. Now, we have already gone through and checked all of this, remember, and we're really happy with the bottom bracket fit. We are installing plastic bottom bracket, so we don't need to add any grease. This is going to be a plastic against carbon interface. See, I told you, one of the best Cannondale bottom brackets I've ever seen. Plastic bottom bracket and everything. Okay, we are done. So a couple of things that you might not have seen us do on camera. First of all, we fitted the gears straight in the mech hanger as well. That was a little bit bent. Customer is supplying their own cassette and chain, so they're going to fit that. Other things you didn't see us do was set up the suspension here. So let me just show you what I've done at the front with the lockout lever. You have to have these two cable adjusters, but if you put them both in the same place, they will knock together and make loads of noise. So it's important that you get a really nice smooth cable run, but at the same time you don't want these just banging against each other and making noise. So separate them out a little bit, try and make all the cables look nice and neat, and you just need to make sure it works. So at the moment these are fully open. These actually have a compression adjust on the top as well as a lockout, and you just got one button to lock out both the fork and the shock at the same time. One button to undo, and we're back to full bounce mode. Feeling really good. Completely flushed the brakes as well. They probably took about 2 syringes worth of fluid before they were completely flushed. Little top tip, make sure we put some new carbon construction paste in, and all the little frame bolts like this, take all of those out and put some grease in there as well, because it's all part of the corrosion resistance, etc. as well. So in all, this looks like completely new bike. Really happy with that. It's missing a front rotor because that's still to arrive. It's all been delayed in post. Sometimes that's the hardest thing with like these really long services, so many parts to rely on being here. But I'm about to get on a train and get down to London for the Rouen Air Show, so I'm going to leave this to one of the guys to fix. Only thing to do now is to put it all in a box, because we're going to ship this back to the customer. We've got a really big box. All we've got to really do is turn the handlebars and ship it pretty much complete. And of course, we need to send the bill, so let's go and talk about that. Okay, the bill as it stands comes to £1,791. And that's going to add another couple of £100 worth of shipping. So we're going to get this back into a bike box, fully insured, and back to the customer. So it's going to be just under £2,000 in total. And in the previous 2 videos, if you haven't seen them, I asked you guys the questions, what would you do if it was your bike? A bike like this right now would probably set you back £6,000 to £7,000. You know, the SRAM X01 drivetrain, top of the line Fox suspension, carbon wheels, carbon cranks, and everything else. So I think it was definitely worth saving. Now, kind of an obvious point is a big chunk of that is a brand spanking new fork. However, like we explained on the other videos, trying to just service this and bring it back up to spec, I believe would still cost around £450. And the biggest reason that we didn't do that was just because of all the corrosion on the chassis, which is fairly fatal. It's just always going to let water in, and you're never going to get a really good seal around all these components unless we can really fix the root of the issue. So I think we're sort of fighting a losing battle with this. So you could probably, if your bike wasn't in such a bad condition like this, you could probably have saved yourself a bit of money by getting that service, but I think that is fatal. Other costs that weren't on the original bill, because we just had to negotiate with the customer, was the rotors. These have gone well and truly past their minimum wear lines, so they've been replaced. The customer actually supplied their own brake pads, some of the spares that they had, and they're sent up with it. And like I said, they're supplying all their own drivetrain in there as well, because hey, why not? We're all open to working with that sort of stuff. One little thing you might have seen in the video, I had this in the wrong way around initially. Weirdly, the correct way is to put this big curve in here with the cable. Seems a bit counterintuitive, but the shock works a whole lot better in that orientation. It's just the cabling that you've got to be really aware of. So it's always worth looking at the instructions if you're unsure. I think the only other thing that we didn't mention in the other videos was some new jockey wheels as well. These really were absolute toast. Now, all of these parts we put in a box for the customer so they can inspect it for themselves. They get to get a really good look at all those bearings and pivots, just how bad they all were. And that is what was left of the lockout lever. So luckily the new fork comes with the new lockout lever, because these can get pretty expensive as well. One last thing, as you look over the shots of the final bike in its full finished state, is we didn't touch the pedals. We don't normally touch pedals unless they're the absolute top of the range ones. There's a couple of reasons. One, they very rarely need it. Two, is pedals are relatively cheap compared to the service costs. And also, especially mountain bike ones, they tend to wear out. And on this one, it's got plenty of evidence of wear here. So really, I think, and obviously here as well, actually, this is one of those things where, generally speaking, you can pick up a pair of pedals in the sale cheaper for the cost of actually service them. So unless the bearings are really wobbling around, we don't tend to touch pedals too much. So I hope that helps. If you found this video really interesting and you really enjoyed it, please think about giving it a thumbs up. I really want to hear your comments. This is a very controversial video. It's an expensive service on a very expensive bike. I'd love to know what you guys think about it. And if you did enjoy it, please think about subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you soon on the next map deck video. Cheers.